When you work with spreadsheets, at some point you are going to look at a cell and its contents, and you're going to want to say, okay, look at this contents, and if they meet a certain condition, whatever it is, I want to do this thing next. And if they don't meet that condition, then I want to do this other thing. And so we have the if statement where we look at a cell's contents, we set up a condition of some kind, and then we simply say, did it meet this condition or not? Now, along with that, we also have CountIf, in which case we set up a condition and we say, okay, we're going to count the cells that meet that condition. And we also have SumIf, which says, well, we're going to add the contents of those cells that meet a specific condition. So we have if, and then we have its close cousins, CountIf and SumIf today. Hi, I'm Terry, one of the Consumer Technology Specialists for Mid-Continent Public Library. And let's look at if, CountIf, and SumIf. As I look at this first example spreadsheet, I can see that we play on some sort of a team, and whatever this sport is, it looks like we might meet, say, on the weekends for 16 weeks, so that'd be like 4 months. And we have our scores and then our opponent's scores. And I would like to put out here in column D something that shows when we won and when we lost. And since I'm all for being positive about our wins, all I want to do is say win, and so we can really see that well. There's really not a point in putting win and lose because a lot of words just make it as difficult to figure out who won as if we just look at the numbers. We're going to, now that we've selected D3, go over to the right of the toolbar and go to this last button, which is the Functions button. And when I click on that drop down, we have an alphabetical list of all functions, but I happen to know that if, which is what we want to use, is in the logical group. And as I hover over logical, if I look over at the left, I can see if. Now there is a short explanation of what if does. It returns value depending on logical expression. And that's what we want to do. We'll go with if, and then we get the syntax, the pattern of what we need to put in for this if function. So it starts with equals if, and then parentheses. And inside the parentheses, it tells us that we need to have a logical expression, comma, a value if true, comma, and a value if false. So our logical expression, we're going to say us. We want to know if we are the winners, so we want to know if our score is greater than the them score, whatever that is. And that is our logical expression. We'll put in a comma, and we've now followed that pattern so far. Now it says, what is the value if true? Well, I'm going to say win, but it's words, or it's a word, it's letters. So we're going to say win, and anytime you deal with text, you must also put quotes around the text. Looking at our pattern, we need to put in another comma to separate our value if true from our value if false. So what's the value if false? Well, I'm just going to put in a blank space. Quote, space, quote. If you leave sheets to put in some sort of a value, it might put in, say, false. And that's not what we're looking for. All right, now that we have that, we're going to press enter. And we didn't win in our first game, so it's blank. Well, let's come down to this little blue box here, rest our mouse on top of it, click and drag down. And look at that. We can very easily now see the games where we won. There's one other thing that we might want to do, and that is we might decide that we want to look at the games where we not only won, but we won in a very spectacular fashion, because we have some really great point spreads here. So we might decide that what we want to do is say, okay, let's go back to if. So we'll go to functions, logical, and if. This time we're going to say, okay, not only did we win, and I'm just going to start here where I know we have a win. All right, so if I have B5 minus C5, and what is that going to be? I want to know if it's greater than, say, 20 points. And then, just like we did before, we need to put in a comma. Now, what's that value if true? Well, in quotes, we are going to put amazing. And then after that, we're going to put in a comma. And then what is the value if false? Well, again, I just want to point out the amazing games, nothing else. So I'm going to put quote, space, quote, and press enter. In our very first game, as a matter of fact, it says, you know what? Here are the other ones that are amazing. And so to the right, it says if I press Control Enter, it will autofill. So let's do that, Control Enter. And I didn't even need to copy that formula down. It simply copied it down for me. Now we've moved to another example spreadsheet. We're in charge of some of the details of a company event, and generally this might be a large company of, say, 1,000 employees, but we just have 11 as our example. And first of all, we have sent them an invitation to this great event, whatever it is, and some of them have RSVP'd, which we tried to stress very much in our literature. Please RSVP by. We need to keep track of who has RSVP'd and who hasn't. And so there's a Y here by their name if they have responded in some way. And I need to be able to get a count. Now, I could use count A and simply count cells that have some sort of a value in them, but I want to be a little more specific and get some practice in. So we're going to do count if the cell has a Y. So in B12, we're going to go to our functions button, and this can be found under the math group. And we can go over to CountIf. So this is a conditional count across a range. So we'll go with that. And we have a pattern. We need to fill in two things here. It's going to count if, and then we need to tell the range of the cells that we're looking at, and then we need to supply the criterion. First of all, the range is B2 through B11, and we need to add in that comma that separates the different pieces of the function. And then what is the criteria? Oh yeah, it's going to equal Y. And again, because the Y is text, it needs to be in quotes. And we'll press enter, and we find that we have 8 people who have RSVP'd. Well, now let's go over to C. And we want to count of those people who have RSVP'd, how many will attend and how many have said they will not attend. And it's really kind of important here that I used an N for no, but if people haven't responded at all, that is still blank, so that I don't have confusion between my yes and my no, and then people who haven't responded at all. In C12, let's go to our functions button, down to math, and then over on the left, let's go to CountIf. And this time, we're going to count a very similar range, C2 through C11. And then we need to put in the comma. And it says, so what is our criteria? Well, again, we're looking for the Y. and press enter, we have 6 people coming. Well, how many have said no? Let's click in C14, go back to that functions button, and down to math, and then across and down to CountIf. And our range is exactly the same thing, C2 through C11. We'll add in a comma to separate the range from the criteria. And then what are we looking for? Well, this time we're looking for an N for no. So we'll put the N in quotes and we'll press enter. 6 yeses, 2 nos, and that equals the number of people who have RSVP'd. Yes, this is very exciting. Now, we need to do one more count, and that is we need to count in D12 how many people are bringing a guest, because they've been told that they can bring a +1 if they decide that they want to do that. We'll go to our Functions button, click the drop down, go to Math, and we're going to CountIf. And what is the range? Well, this time it is D2 through D11. Don't forget that comma. And then what we are looking for is a Y. And the Y, because it's text, needs to be in quotes, and we'll press enter. So of the 6 people who will attend, 5 are bringing guests. Now let's look at column F, where it says guest fee owed. Well, part of the invitation said, you are welcome to bring a +1, but to defray costs for things like badges and maybe even part of their refreshments, please pay us $10. Well, let's go ahead and use an if to put in $10 if they are going to bring a guest, or nothing if they aren't going to bring a guest, maybe even a 0. Because we want to make sure that the fees that we're expecting eventually add up to the fees that we have received. In F2, we're going to go back to the functions, and this time we're going to go to logical and back to if. So what are we looking for? Well, in this case, we want to know if they have a guest. So in D2, does D2 equal Y? Does it equal yes, they have somebody coming? Then what is the value if they do have somebody coming? Well, they should bring $10. And because that's a number, I don't need to put it in quotes. Now, what's the value if false? I think I'm going to put in a 0 because they don't owe anything, but I want to be sure that I keep track of that 0 as well. And then I'm going to press enter. So far we have Fanny Adams, who has RSVP'd. She will attend. She's bringing a guest who is Jason Singleton, and we know that she owes us $10. Now let's copy that formula down. And we see that we are owed money for Elizabeth Park, Pablo Olson, Sherry Chandler, and Lynette Klein. We might also decide that we want to total up this column, and we have 2 ways to do that. Of course, we could say sum, but we might decide to do something else just to be a little creative today. As I look at columns F and G, and I especially look at column G, I realize that even if we expected people to pay us $10 up front, we have someone who gave us a partial payment. And so in the comments, I want to put a note to be sure to look at this and make sure that we come back and find that payment for Sherry Chandler at some point. So what we're going to do, because really we could have a series of these, and remember this is just a short example, we're going to go to H2 and go to our functions. We're just going to do an if. So we'll go to logical and if. This time our logical expression is, we're going to take the guest fee that is owed minus the fee that is paid. If that equals 0, then we're going to put in a comma. If the value is true, we aren't going to put in a comment. So I'm going to put in quote, space, quote. And then, of course, to end that value, if true, I need to put in a comma. Now, what happens if the value is false? What if f minus g is not 0? Well, then we need to say something like partial payment, fee needed, something, complete payment needed. So let's put in quotes because we're dealing with text, complete payment needed, and end the quotes. And then we'll press enter. And we don't see anything to begin with, but I'm going to copy this formula down. And right here where we have that partial payment, in H8 it says complete payment needed because we know that in column G we have this one partial payment. Well, then under guest fee owed, we have a couple of ways we could do this. We could just really do a sum, but let's do a SumIf. So let's go up to functions, and we're going to go to math, and then we'll scroll down quite a ways to SumIf. And this is a sum of series of numbers across a range, but it's a conditional sum. So in this case, what is the range? And then we'll put in our comma, and then it says, so what is the criteria? Well, the criteria is it needs to be 10. And then this is something that happens actually fairly often with functions. The sum range is in square brackets, meaning that it is optional. So we can simply put in the range and the criterion and ignore the sum range unless we need to use it. So we're going to press enter. And it says that we should have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tens, which is 50. Now, let's come over here. And in G12, we're going to use the same function, but we only want to count the complete payments, not the partial payments. So we'll go back up to functions, down to math, and then down to SumIf. So what is our range this time? Well, it's G2 through G11, and we need to add in that comma to separate it from the next piece of the function. What is the criterion? Oh, well, it's 10. And again, we can ignore this optional piece of sum range. So we can press enter, and it says that we should have $50, but we only have $40 of complete payments. So you can kind of use if and SumIf to really come up with some interesting conclusions to what you have within your spreadsheet. I've now moved to a new example where I looked at the probably sale prices at 2 different grocery stores, and I just wrote down some of their prices for, generally it was one thing or maybe it was a bunch, but generally per one this was the price. And so let's say that I have some specific items that I want to get at store A and other specific items that I want to get at store B. But while I'm there, I might as well pick up some of this fresh produce. And so I will probably pick up some bananas, for example, in both stores. So I'm curious what the total for, say, a banana in store A and a banana in store B, what I'll pay for both of those. And so while it's kind of a lighthearted example, it hopefully helps us understand how SumIf, with that extra little piece at the end of the function, can work. I have clicked in E2, and I want to find the bananas over here in the grocery shopping, and then I want to get a total of those two bananas here in E2. So let's go to the Functions button and then come down to Math and find SumIf. Now, what is the range of what I'm looking for? Well, I'm looking for banana. So I'm going to select A2 through A19. If my mouse will cooperate. There, through A19. And then I'm going to put in my comma. What is the criterion? Well, banana, because that's what I'm looking for. Now, again, banana is text, so it gets quotes around it. Then we'll put in a comma. Now, this is where SumIf has a lot of power. This optional sum range. What it's really saying is when you find banana in column A, when I select this range in column B, it's saying look for the corresponding value in column B and add that to a total. So my sum range here is B2 through B19. And then I'm going to press enter, and look at that. It has found the two bananas for 25 cents and 21 cents, added them together, and given me the total. That is really impressive, but it is such a nice way to look for one kind of value and then find its corresponding information in another column and then add that together to come up with the total that you need. Well, let's come to E6 and let's do another one of those SumIf ideas. And we aren't going to use that sum range again, but let's see what we can do here. We have a lot of items in our grocery shopping, and remember, we're going to stores and we're just going to pick up these little extras along the way. We are going to look for the items that are less than $1.25 and then pick those up, but I want to know how much I'm spending in total for those items. So we'll go back to Functions button, go down to Math, go over to the left to SumIf, and then what is our range? Well, again, it's all of those values of the different pieces of produce within the two grocery stores, and then we'll add our comma as we know we need to do. And then for the criterion, I'd like to type just less than $1.25, but because I'm putting in that less than kind of logical symbol, it really isn't then a pure numeric value, so I need to put in quotes less than and then 1.25 and end the quotes, and then I can press enter and it gives me my total of $5.10 for every piece of produce, all added together, that is under $1.25. And so today we've looked at if, which creates a test of some kind, and then we tell Sheets what to do if the contents of that cell either make that criterion true or make it false, and then what to do in either case. We also looked at CountIf, which lets us count the cell contents if they meet a certain criterion. And then we've also looked at SumIf, where we add together all of the cell contents if they meet a certain criterion. And in the expanded part of SumIf, we look for values in one column, and then we find the matching values and add those matching values from a separate column. In any case, CountIf, SumIf can really expand your ability to work with your spreadsheet and get the answers that you need. To learn even more, be sure to go to mymcpl.org/online learning for such great resources as Universal Class, Learning Express Library, LinkedIn Learning, and Udemy Business. We also premiere videos every Wednesday and Friday at 1 o'clock. If you miss a video premiere, you'll still be able to find it later when it's convenient for you. You can find us on Facebook at MCPL 360, and you can find us on YouTube by going to our MCPL MO channel.